Hello, I'm Judy Alexander. Welcome to our official book launch of Reigniting the Spark, Why Stable Relationships Lose Intimacy and How to Get It Back. We're so glad you're joining us this evening. We wish it could be in person, but in this time of social distancing, this is the only way we can hold public events. On the bright side, if we were to go ahead with the book launch party as scheduled locally, we couldn't have all of you here from all over the world. So that's a definite positive outcome of all of this. Let me tell you a little something about the author of Reigniting the Spark, Dr. Bruce Chalmer. My mother always said I should marry Dr. Right. Well, this time I married a doctor, and this time I got it right. Bruce has been a therapist for over 30 years, much of it working with couples. Over the past 7 or 8 years, Bruce has been doing a series of videos which have received many views and great feedback, and he realized he could pull these into a book, and from this, Reigniting the Spark was born. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you my favorite therapist and my husband, Bruce Chalmer.
Hello, welcome to our party. This is really a treat for us. In fact, we have our bubbly here, and I hope you have your favorite beverage, be it alcoholic or not, with you. And I want to offer a toast. Really, I want to offer a toast for starters. I know a lot of people have been saying this, to all of the doctors and nurses and all the other healthcare professionals who are on the front lines of all of this. Our daughter-in-law is a geriatrician in New York City and was talking about the fact that about a third of her colleagues were sick already. And the courage that these people are showing, and I just want to drink a toast to all of them. L'chaim, l'chaim. And I also want to welcome everybody. This is really delightful for us to do this. We have not done this sort of thing before, so we're kind of winging it as we go. What we're going to be doing...
Linda says she can't hear anything. Is there sound?
If anybody else is not hearing sound, let us know. I think if you're not hearing sound, you probably have to press a... Yeah, Judy's going to answer you. If you're not hearing sound, you probably have to do something on your screen to enable it. Yeah, nobody else is saying that, so I'm assuming that sound is actually... Yeah, sound is actually happening.
And then we might want to say this isn't like Zoom. We can't see you. We can see your comments here because we're following those. And so if you have questions, we'll take a look at them. Okay, Linda got her sound on. So I'm hearing, we can hear. So we cannot see you. You can see us, but we can see your questions and your comments.
Yeah, and also mention, because of this particular technology, there's a delay of probably 4 or 5 seconds at least between our actually saying stuff and you're hearing it. So when we see the comments, it may be a few seconds delay before we're actually able to answer it. What we're planning for this evening is I'm going to do some readings and just relatively short readings from the book. And then in between the readings, Judy and I are going to have a conversation. And of course, that'll be a great time to bring up any questions or comments that you folks want to put. And you can do that 2 different ways. I'm guessing the comment on the event is really the way to go. It's going to be a lot easier than the email. But if you're not on Facebook, you can do it this way as well. So here's the way you can do it. The stuff up at the top of the screen. You can join the conversation by commenting below wherever it is you folks have been putting in comments. Or you can email askdrchalmer@brucechalmer.com and we'll get that. And so that's a way, if you happen to be watching us and you're not actually on Facebook yourself, you can get in touch with us that way. So I think we're going to start with a reading, and I'm going to do a brief reading from the very beginning of the book, the introduction to the book. It's somewhat excerpted. Judy is holding a copy of the book. Oh yeah, and before I go any further, if you look at the bottom of the screen, you will see a link, brucechalmer.com/books. That's where you can go to get links that will take you directly to the places where you can buy the book. I have a link on there for Amazon. I have a link on there for Barnes & Noble for those people who don't want to use Amazon. I will tell you frankly, if you buy it from Amazon, it'll help the sales of the book because that affects Amazon's algorithm. So if you are so inclined to buy the Kindle version right now, I absolutely guarantee that all of the bits you will receive, even from Amazon, are 100% guaranteed virus-free. So that the bits that you download are guaranteed free. You don't even have to disinfect your equipment. So with that, I'm going to start reading. Anything else I should mention before we start reading
I
here?
don't think so.
Okay, great. And Judy will be checking for comments and questions as we go. So I'm reading from right in the beginning of the book. Why read this book? If you're in a committed relationship, while we do this, I just realized, I want to put up a screen for a little bit of atmosphere. So I want to reassure you that the couples that you're seeing these are stock photos. These are not people that I know or have worked with. And we just put them up there for a little bit of atmosphere. None of the couples, of course, that I'm actually reading about in this book or that I wrote about in the book, none of them are real, although all of the situations are in fact realistic. And that's, of course, what one does when one writes a therapy book. So I've encountered situations very similar to these, but I thoroughly changed all the details so that the actual people I'm talking about are not real people. They're composites of other experiences I've had. So why read this book? If you're in a committed relationship that you'd like to improve, then this book is for you. Maybe you're considering couples therapy and wondering how it could help. Or perhaps you've already done some couples therapy, but you wish it would help more. Maybe you don't know what to do, but you know that something in your relationship, your ability to communicate, your once passionate sex life, your sense of shared values and shared dreams just isn't working anymore, and it hurts. Maybe your relationship is fine as it is, but you'd like to find new ways to deepen your intimate connection. This book is for you. In these pages, you'll find a message of hope. This book won't solve your problems or enrich your relationship all on its own. That will require the efforts of both you and your partner. But it will strengthen your faith and help you understand the work that needs to be done. The 7 words. Years ago, when I was relatively new in private practice, a colleague in a consultation group asked me, "How do you do couples therapy anyway?" I realized his question wasn't entirely serious, but I thought for a moment before answering. I suppose when you boil it down, I'm basically telling people, be kind and don't panic. Not long after, I realized that I needed to expand the formula slightly and revised it to be kind, don't panic, and have faith. 7 words, don't forget to count and, that comprise 3 principles. I've been working as a therapist for couples, individuals, and families for about 30 years. Turns out relationships are more complicated than what 7 words can capture. Who knew? But the 7-word formula has continued to guide my work, and many of the couples I work with tell me it has guided them too. I've been trained in quite a few techniques in schools of therapy over the years, including psychodynamic, narrative, cognitive behavioral, solution-focused, hypnotherapy, and others. I've learned a lot from those trainings and have applied those lessons in my work. Theoretical understandings are important guides, and techniques can be effective tools. But somehow the real people I see in my office often refuse to behave like the examples in my trainings. That's because life is more complex than what any school of thought or set of techniques can capture. And the longer I practiced, the more I've realized that those 7 words can be more beneficial to couples than any particular therapeutic technique. Therefore, I've assiduously avoided creating yet another TLA, 3-letter acronym, to brand my methodology. You don't need to sign up for my patented miracle cure or find a therapist trained in my institute. Instead, this book uses the principles in the 7-word formula as a guide. We'll discuss what being a couple is all about, what may lead you to relationship problems, and how you can heal from those problems. Reading this book will help you understand your situation, guide you toward solutions, and offer you hope. In part 1, we'll discuss kindness in the context of building relationships, along with the 2 golden gifts relationships need to survive and thrive. Part 2 is about anxiety and its causes, including trauma. In particular, we'll see how anxiety affects passion in a couple. Part 3 explores the roles of faith and forgiveness in healing from problems in your relationship, both individually and as a couple. Part 4 then applies these ideas to a variety of topics that couples might struggle with, including marriage, sex, infidelity, and breakups. About me. Besides my decades of experience as a psychologist working with couples in Vermont, there are a few facts about me that I think will give you, the reader, a better sense of what shapes my views. First, I am Jewish. When I moved to Vermont as a young man 47 years ago, I became particularly active in the Jewish community, often in leadership roles. I mention that because my approach to couples therapy is influenced greatly by Jewish sources and experiences. You might wonder why the vast majority of people I work with are non-Jewish. But of course, that's because I can't work professionally with people I'm close to in other parts of my life. As you'll see in my discussion of faith in Chapter 7, my approach does not assume any particular religious orientation, but many of my clients, both religious and secular, have expressed appreciation for my willingness to discuss their spiritual lives, and my own faith has been an integral part of that willingness. Another factoid about me that I think is relevant: before becoming a psychologist, I was a statistician in medical research at the University of Vermont. In fact, I wrote a statistics textbook that you can still purchase, though you'll have some difficulty using the included 5¼ floppy disk. My background as a statistician informs my understanding of science's role in how we make sense of the world and how we can apply scientific findings to the practice of therapy. These two influences, faith and science, are central to how I work. To paraphrase Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, science tells us what reality is, and faith tells us what reality means. To work with people in pain and help them heal requires both science and faith, and this book reflects both perspectives. A Talmudic tale. The Talmud, in Tractate Shabbat 31a, tells a story of a scoffer who came to the sage Hillel and challenged him to teach the entire Torah while he was standing on one foot. Hillel agreed and said to him, "What is hateful to you, don't do to another. That is the whole Torah. The rest is commentary. Now go and learn." To paraphrase Hillel, be kind, don't panic, and have faith. That's what you need to know about relationships. The rest is commentary. Now go and learn. Let's go and learn. So here we both are again. So, Judy, do you have questions, or do folks out there, have they been posting questions? Or
Well, no
take it
questions just yet, but I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on your 7-word formula, the be kind, don't panic, and have faith.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. It was sort of interesting. I mentioned this, of course, in the reading I just did. This is a colleague of mine, and we were in a consultation group. And when he asked that question, how do you do couples therapy? It sort of took me aback, but I just thought about it. And I said, well, if you boil down the techniques I was learning, they were about the don't panic part. They were basically saying, if people are freaking out, there's no way they can experience each other as a couple. They're too busy in being in survival mode, fight or flight mode. So I realized, essentially what I'm telling people, or, the techniques are inviting for people, is be kind and don't panic. But, after a while, I started noticing which were the couples. This was, early in my practice, and I was learning. Of course, any therapist does this. I was learning from my clients, and I noticed the couples that did well with that, the couples that did well in general. The real question wasn't so much be kind and don't panic. People in various ways, maybe we didn't always say it that way, but in various ways, people understood that idea. The problem was, how do you not panic? That was the issue. And what I noticed was the couples that didn't panic were couples that had faith. Now, when I say faith, and maybe we can postpone some of this because I'm going to read a section from the portion on faith. I think that's the third reading I've got for this evening. But faith, I'm not talking about faith, specifically religious faith, although it's very consistent with religious faith. Faith, my little definition of faith is when you accept that reality is right, the rightness of reality. The couples that were willing to work with reality rather than fight with it. I'm not saying they didn't try to change it. Of course they did. But they would work with it. They would find meaning in it. Those were the couples that were able to experience anxiety but not freak out. So they were the ones who didn't panic. So basically, be kind in the sense of experience yourselves as kin, not merely as, as good people. We should all be good people to others, but it's really about being kin to each other. Know that you're a team. And the way you do that is by not panicking. And the way you don't panic in the presence of anxiety is by having faith. Faith is how you cannot panic. So that's where that came from.
So I know you're still practicing now online. What are you seeing now, or what are you hearing from couples that who are stuck together, sometimes with children, sometimes without? But what are you hearing? Is there an overarching problem that couples are experiencing now in this time of isolation, where you're only with each other all the time, and how are they coping?
Yeah, this is the third week where I'm doing just video sessions, and where many of us are are doing the social distancing thing. And I can address that from two different angles. I've seen an interesting characteristic benefit that some couples have reported. And I've also seen some characteristic problems that they're reporting. This was happening enough, and look, this is not a scientific survey, but this is based on how many couples have I seen in the last 2 weeks, maybe 20 or 25, something like that, I don't know. And I've noticed that couples I had been working with before who had started to show some progress were, surprisingly, I have to say, doing really well with each other around things that normally they wouldn't do so well with each other about. They were collaborating and cooperating. This whole global pandemic that we're dealing with seems to have helped them have some perspective on their own issues, and I noticed that happening quite a lot. I certainly have noticed a number of couples have talked about they are cooped up together, sometimes with kids, as you point out, sometimes with not, and sometimes what helps one relax isn't what helps the other relax, and sometimes those things come into conflict. And I've heard that from several people. Somebody wants to do a particular activity or attend a particular Zoom event or something like that because it gives them comfort, and their partner is feeling like, well, I'd rather have you hang out with me than, why do you want to do that when it's not something I want to do? So, that kind of difference between people can be somewhat amplified in a situation like this. And look, I know this is this reminds me of the Maggid who had the story, in the old country, the storyteller who had one story and used it for every occasion. This can bring me right back to my formula, because it really is about learning how to tolerate those differences, which will raise some anxiety without panicking, and the solution to doing that is faith. So that's kind of my answer to everything at the moment. I realize it's kind of glib, but I have noticed that happen. It really, this calls for an enormous amount of, it's not, tolerating sounds like, it's got a bad word, that sense of tolerating, because it sounds so dismal, but it's tolerating the anxiety so that you can appreciate difference as well as be annoyed by it. You can do both. That's a very Jewish concept too, by the way. You can embrace contradictions. So other things that anybody's...
It came up on the feed. People are asking if we're going to have a Q&A. We're not going to have a Q&A per se, but I'm checking the feed. So if you do have questions or comments that you'd like to make, that's why I'm looking away. I'm not being rude. I'm just checking the feed to see if anybody is sending any comments in.
Yeah, and I will note, the nice thing about Facebook Live, as opposed to being like on network TV or something, we're not in a fixed time slot per se. So just, send your questions, and even after I've done my readings or in the middle, whatever, send your questions, and anytime. It's really, the whole thing is a Q&A. You can put it that way as well. I have a question now. And here comes a question.
Okay,
yes.
So one of the questions is, what do you do if the two of you started a relationship sharing a hobby, then one person really gets into the hobby and the other person falls out of the hobby? Then it leads to the two
being apart a great deal. Yeah.
The two being apart a great deal, as one partner gets almost obsessed and the other comes to loathe the hobby.
Yeah. Yeah, the technical answer to that is Gewalt. That's the technical answer. I'm being slightly facetious. Very slightly. No, that's a tricky situation. It is a similar thing. People have differences. The differences come and go. People can get into something and then, exactly the pattern you described. And what it calls for is, intimacy in general, really. I might as well, I'll leap ahead into the next topic. I'm going to talk about what I call the rather hokey expression, the two golden gifts, which are stability and intimacy. Intimacy is what is called for when you have some difference like that is causing you difficulty, and you want to be able to talk about it without sending yourselves or each other into a panic. And so what it calls for is the willingness to talk about it with an open mind. And that is not always easy, I will say. So, I don't have a simple formula for what you do in that situation other than develop your skills in intimacy, because that's how you solve problems like that. That's how you manage problems like that.
So we have a couple of other comments that came in about faith. So when you say faith, is it religious faith or faith in oneself?
What I want to do, if it's okay, I'd like to defer that for a bit, because I'm going to talk. I have a whole section on faith. So I think if it's okay, I'd like to defer that question for a little while. I won't keep you waiting forever. But I want to do the second reading, which really kind of lays the groundwork for the third one, which is about faith. So I think this might be a good time to do that. Does that sound okay?
Was that the next reading that you were going to
Yeah,
do?
the next reading is about, it's not the faith one, but it's the one about the two golden gifts.
Oh, okay.
But to understand how faith helps, I think you really need to understand stability and intimacy. So this will also introduce you to a couple of my example couples, and just to get a sense of, a flavor of how they are in the book. So this is from chapter 2, the two golden gifts, stability and intimacy. Tara and Trey came to me because they want to stay together, but they keep repeating, well, wait a minute, I got to give you the atmosphere here. Sorry. Got to remember to switch so you can see the sample couples down there at the bottom. Tara and Trey come to me because they want to stay together, but they keep repeating a cycle of splitting up and getting back together. It's gone on like that for 3 years. They clearly love each other, and they tell me they have an active sex life, but they can't manage to stay together for more than a year or so before one of them calls it quits, often during a screaming argument fueled by drinking. Then, within a few weeks, or at most a few months, they get back together and the cycle repeats. This has happened 4 times now. Doris and Ken come to me because they also want to stay together, but their story is very different. They've been married for 35 years and have 4 adult kids and 7 grandchildren. What brought them to therapy was Ken's discovery of Doris's text messages with an old high school boyfriend. The texts had gone from friendly to emotional to sexual over the course of a few weeks. Doris insists there's been no physical contact with the old boyfriend. He lives far away, and Ken is pretty sure he believes her, although there was at least one opportunity he knows of when they could have been together. But this event has shaken them both. Ken because he had never doubted Doris's faithfulness, and Doris because she never thought herself capable of straying even as much as she did. They also clearly love each other, and a year ago, both would have said they had a solid marriage. Though there are endless variations, Tara and Trey, and Doris and Ken illustrate the 2 golden gifts you need to assume goodwill in a relationship. And I should mention parenthetically, I talk about the assumption of goodwill being a really important part of kindness. I talk about that in chapter 1. I mean the kind of gifts we refer to when we talk about someone who's become highly skilled at something. You need some basic talent, but then you need to develop your talent into skill and mastery. So, what are the 2 golden gifts? Let's call them stability and intimacy. You need to get good at both if you want your relationship to work. And the funny thing about the 2 gifts is sometimes they work together, but sometimes they conflict. Your work to develop one makes it harder to hang on to the other, which is why long-term relationships can be so challenging to maintain. So that's the end of that reading. And I thought we could talk for a bit about those concepts of stability and intimacy, because really, when I'm working with couples, let me put us both back on the screen here. When I'm working with couples, that's one of the things I usually introduce in, first or second session. It usually comes up as a way of structuring the conversation. And it's one of those things that I often tell this to people, when what you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? So I have my favorite way of structuring the conversation, and I think, I'll bet this will help these folks. And, it seems like it often does. That concept of stability and intimacy, I think, is really helpful because of the conflict between them. The essential skill of stability is to be able to avoid or lower anxiety. When a couple first gets together, it's funny, very few of the couples that come to see me are there because of roommate issues, especially if they've been together for a long time. Roommate issues being like, it drives me nuts when you put the toothpaste in a certain place, or, leave the door open, or whatever that sort of thing might be. Very few couples, Judy, I got a smile out of Judy for that one, because she's always trying to remind me to close the bathroom door when I come into the bedroom. Yeah, so. And about 2/3 of the time I remember. Give me credit for that. Yeah, pretty good, yeah. But no, that sort of thing rarely brings people there, because that's the sort of stuff, you work out when you start living together. Usually that's not stuff that drives people to therapy. Sometimes it drives people to divorce, but it doesn't usually drive people to therapy in my experience. And there's lots of other things like that. A huge stability skill is fidelity. If the deal couples have, and I have to ask nowadays, if the deal couples have is monogamy, and still most of the couples I see have that as their deal, although maybe a surprising number to old folks like me, maybe a surprising number of folks don't have that as their deal, but most of the heterosexual couples I see, which is by far the majority of couples I see, their deal is monogamy. And so If there is infidelity, and actually there could be infidelity even in non-monogamous relationships, of course, if people are violating whatever the rules are, that is a hugely destabilizing thing. So the skill of stability, and it is a skill to recognize that, you avoid things that are likely to lead you astray. That skill is a huge factor in stability, and it lowers anxiety, it avoids anxiety. The ability to know how to make a living if you can. Certainly, the having difficulties with that can be very destabilizing. Substance issues can be hugely destabilizing. So all the skills of stability have to do with ways that you can be with someone and, that term get along with someone, that really is all about stability. Intimacy is a very different thing. What I mean by intimacy, and I'm not just talking about sexual intimacy, I mean intimacy in all sorts of ways. It means being essentially honest with yourself and each other, emotionally, and of course in other ways as well, cognitively as well. So
what do you find is the fear that people have with intimacy?
Well, that is my point about what's the essential skill, and you just touched on it. The essential skill of intimacy is to tolerate anxiety, not to avoid it or reduce it even necessarily, but to tolerate it, because the fear is, you fall in love with someone and you get together with someone, maybe you marry them, you live together, they become incredibly important to you. You have kids together, it raises the ante hugely. And to raise something with a partner that you are pretty sure your partner is not going to be happy about, or even if even situations where this especially applies in the sexual domain, you want to try something, but you don't know if your partner's going to be okay with it, or maybe they'll be revolted by it, or maybe they'll be intrigued by it. You just don't know. That raises anxiety. It's funny. I just had this association of remembering being a teenager. When a teenage boy wants to ask out a girl, boy, am I an old guy or what? I'm sure that's not how it happens anymore, but back in the day, I don't know if you girls knew it, but we boys felt a lot of anxiety at that concept. You could feel amazing amounts of anxiety because it was somebody you wanted to impress, or you wanted to see if you could connect with. That raises anxiety. So one of the biggest skills of intimacy is to be willing to tolerate that anxiety, because, and there's a corollary to that, if I may speak in mathematical terms. The corollary is one of the biggest skills of intimacy is the willingness to disappoint or displease your partner, not because you're being a jerk, but because there's something really important that you need to bring up, and it may be something your partner won't want you to bring up. So that is a huge intimacy skill, to tolerate anxiety.
Okay.
You have other?
Well, I think some of the questions had to do with faith.
Yeah, so that will lead us neatly. Yeah, I wanted to lay the groundwork for that. So let me do the reading now about faith. This is from part 3 of the book. And it's the third part of the formula. It was be kind is part 1, don't panic is part 2, and part 3 is and have faith. Notice I had to include and because it's a 7-word formula. And so this is from chapter 7, what is faith? And this is not right in the beginning of the chapter. It's an excerpt from that chapter. Why is a psychologist talking about faith? And I gotta put on my atmosphere screen, right? Yes. Why is a psychologist talking about faith? After all, I work with people in a secular context. I'm not a faith-based practitioner, as the term is often used, and I don't assume that people who consult me adhere to any particular religion or philosophy. But, as we'll discuss in this part of the book, I've realized over my years of practice that faith is what heals people and relationships. In particular, faith is what allows you to get hold of yourself. My definition of faith is informed by that perspective. That I will put in that concept of get hold of yourself is a key concept that I talk about in part 2, which has to do with that notion of not panicking. Even though there's anxiety there, you have to get hold of yourself. You have to find a way of tolerating the anxiety. So faith is what allows you to do that. What is faith? Let's start with what faith is not, as I am using the term. Faith is not the same as religion or a belief in God or any particular entity. I have known people of faith who don't affiliate with any religion, and religious people who, as I use the term, don't seem to be people of faith. Faith is not something you believe or think. It's not a set of facts or a particular narrative. It's also not blind confidence in any particular prediction. It's not the feeling that everything happens for a reason or that everything will turn out fine. I'm also not referring to a leap of faith, which implies a willingness to believe assertions without proof or even in the face of contrary evidence. The faith I'm talking about doesn't require you to suspend your intelligence. Okay, that's what faith is not. So, what is faith? Defining faith. Faith is when you accept that reality is right. When you accept reality is right, what does that mean? Let's parse that definition starting at the end. What does it mean for reality to be right? Well, I don't mean right as in always desirable or even fair. A lot of reality is obviously painful and unjust. Rather, I mean reality is right in two senses. First, reality is neither crazy nor arbitrary. The state of things at this moment is a natural consequence of the state of things that led up to this very moment. Reality is right in the sense that it follows orderly laws, which you can try to infer, even though you don't have enough information to predict or explain the details much of the time. To put it another way, if the laws of physics arbitrarily changed, if, for example, when you drop your toast, it not only fails to fall butter side down, but in fact goes up to the ceiling, you would have the sense that reality isn't right. Our assertion that reality is right implies that this doesn't happen. Or if it does, you can try to find a rational explanation for it and adjust your understanding accordingly. Second, reality is not merely subject to orderly laws. It's good that it's that way. Reality is right in the sense that it's good to be what it is. Not only is reality orderly and comprehensible, but it's fundamentally good. This idea that reality is right in the sense of good is a statement of value, not an assertion of fact. No amount of data can confirm or deny a judgment that reality is basically a good thing. It's not provable or disprovable. Your view of reality as good can have profound effects on how you experience the world, but it's not demonstrably true or false. Note that it's not what you think reality is that determines whether you have faith. What you believe reality is should be open to questioning and revision based on new information. What you believe reality is, what you think the facts are, is a matter of science, or at least it should be. If you refuse to take in new information because it challenges your beliefs, you're not showing faith, you're just being closed-minded or superstitious. Closing your mind to new information isn't faith, it's willful blindness. No, faith isn't about what reality is. Faith is about what reality means. Faith says reality is ours to try to understand because it's not the result of the gods playing with us for sport. And when you inevitably encounter aspects of reality that you don't understand, faith says that even those aspects, even suffering and evil, are rooted in a basically good universe, and you can do your best to make things better. Now, let's consider the first part of my definition of faith, the acceptance part. If I'm saying that faith itself isn't a particular belief, what does it mean to accept that reality is right? Isn't that just believing in a good universe, or if you're oriented toward Western religions, a good God? What's the difference between believing and accepting? I recognize that the terms are often used synonymously, but the kind of acceptance I'm referring to isn't based on belief in a proposition. Rather, when you accept that reality is right, you're adopting that view as axiomatic, as a basis for how you experience and understand everything else. In other words, faith isn't what you believe. Faith shapes how you believe, experience, and act. You're still using your critical faculties to interpret what you experience, but when you do so informed by faith, your experience of the facts on the ground is different from your experience of those same facts without faith. And that difference is key to how you handle your life and relationships.
So one of the questions that we had about faith, I know you addressed it a little bit. Can you talk a little bit more about just having faith if you're not a religious person?
Yeah. So, I made that comment about I've known people of faith who aren't religious. I mean, religion to me I shouldn't say to me, I defer to the scholars, some of whom I think are watching actually, certainly people who are more scholarly than I, to talk about technical definitions of religion, but I'm referring to religion as a system of practices, often involving ritual, a systemic way of organizing these understandings of, if it's a theistic religion, of God, of the universe, of how life works. Religions get labels like, Jewish. They're Jewish as a people. It's also a religion, or a Christian of various kinds or whatever. So, and interesting, Eastern religions don't necessarily fit that so well. but Western religions, Islam, Christianity, Judaism, tend to be these organized systems that are pretty well defined, by those names. I've known plenty of people who don't participate in that much, who nevertheless seem to approach life that they accept the rightness of it. They approach life. It's not just having a positive attitude, actually, although I think that it tends to result in a positive attitude. It's that they approach life as full of meaning. And so they can deal with stuff much better without panicking, even when they are in distress. That's what I mean by that sort of faith. And conversely, I have met people who are very much adherents of religion, who I don't think are people of faith at all. Now, I didn't read this section, but I think it's one of my big screeds in the book, is I go into considerable pains to distinguish between faith and fundamentalism, which in my view are opposites. By fundamentalism, I mean dogmatic certainty. The sort of folks, like the guy who said that the reason why COVID-19 was spreading through synagogues was because it's punishing the Jews for not accepting Jesus. The guy is, on the one hand, you could say an idiot. I would say he's an idolater. I would say he is claiming a knowledge of God and a knowledge of the universe that is ridiculously impossible for a human being to claim knowledge of, and it's turned him into an idiot as he does so. So I don't call that person a person of faith, at least when he's expressing those things. I call him somebody who's the opposite of a person of faith. That's not faith. That's closed-mindedness. So they're not the same thing at all. And so there are plenty of religious people who are people of faith. There are plenty of non-religious people who are also people of faith, and vice versa.
So we had a comment here. It says, when do couples of the same faith get along better? So I'm not sure if that means faith or religion in this sense.
Let's assume it means religion.
Okay.
I'm smiling because, so which hat am I wearing? Am I wearing my kippah or am I wearing my psychologist hat, right? When I'm wearing my psychologist hat, which is, my professional life, hey, this is a professional book. When I'm wearing that book, I work with folks where there are plenty of interfaith couples, and I give my all to helping them, and many of them do just fine. So the reason for asking that question, of course, is that is one of many kinds of differences that can prove difficult for couples. And often it's surprising, they often don't realize it. For example, when young folks, especially young folks, they fall in love and they get married and then they might have kids. Actually, these days they fall in love, they have kids, and then they might get married. But in any case, that's when they often discover. And it's not just a question of how do they raise the kids either, by the way. Mm-hmm. They often discover there are some values differences that are inherent in those differences in faith background. I have such respect for couples that manage to pull it off. Now, when I'm wearing my kippah, when I'm being Mr. Jewish, I'm thinking, if a Jew asks me, should I marry a Jew? I would say, yeah. And I say that, I say that with great respect for all sorts of Jews, including, people I love in my own family who didn't do that. And I accept that totally. But if you're talking about sort of how do you stack the odds, Judy, for those of you who don't know Judy, she's Jewish too.
It makes it easier.
It makes it easier. I mean, what was your term was you wanted somebody who would get the jokes,
exactly.
Right? And I wanted somebody who would tolerate my Jewishness. And I say that, partly facetiously and partly not. We're not an easy people. I'm guessing much of the crowd watching this is Jewish, but maybe a lot of you are not. We're not an easy crowd. I fully fully respect that. And it's funny. This is kind of a little intimate sharing of my own. The reason I think I would have had a hard time with a woman who isn't Jewish, and there are many, this is one of those, some of my best friends' comments, there are lots of really good non-Jewish women out there, and men too, But the reason I would have had a hard time with it is I would have had a hard time trusting that she could deal with my being Jewish. And even if she up and down, that's not about her, that's about me, this hypothetical her. So I never considered the possibility of marrying somebody who wasn't Jewish and found somebody who was very Jewish.
So we have another question. Well, what if couples have different anxiety levels during these stressful days? How do you reach a balance? Great question.
That's a great question. And look, my first answer to that is that's got to be true practically everybody. One of those differences that I mentioned, in response to a question earlier on. Say what? Oh,
us.
Oh, us. Yes. Yeah, that's right. Well, exactly. I thought you were telling me I should stop or something. No, you're saying
us,
the two
different anxiety
that's different
levels.
anxiety. Yeah, different anxiety levels and different manifestations and different things make us anxious. And I think that's just got to be true of pretty much any couple. There's always going to be different things that bother people. If you're lucky, you don't freak out at the same time. Yeah, I'm going to have I'll drink to that. Right? If you're lucky, you don't freak out at the same time, so that you can be, you can pick each other up when necessary. At times when you're both freaking out, this is why the kinship aspect, the be kind aspect, is so important, because when you have that experience of being in a team with someone, I'm going to get all verklempt in a moment, if I go into this, but when you have that experience, then you face a crisis like this and you just thank God that you have someone to be with. And I say that with great compassion for many people who don't have that now. And it is really hard to be in this situation. And, I've imagined that circumstance, and I know lots of people in that circumstance. And, all of us have our worries about different things. And, it's one of the reasons why that's why couples therapy is worth the effort. That's why I shouldn't even say couples therapy. That's why being in a couple for many of us is worth the effort.
And actually, we have a comment here who says, in terms of some struggling couples doing well in this time, I wonder if it is because in the face of a real emergency or threat, some people's best qualities come out. Sometimes safety and boredom bring out our intolerance and selfishness, and the petty clashes that can seem huge at calm times can fade away in the face of a real threat.
Absolutely. Yes, that is absolutely true. And
thank you, David. Good comment.
Thank you, Rabbi. Yes, that's a great comment, and I don't know if you were there when I was talking about this earlier, but I have noted that over the course of the past several weeks, as this crisis has continued, that many couples that were really having all sorts of difficulties just with that basic stability of getting along seem to be doing fine. I will note, interestingly, some of those same couples, I just had a conversation about this the other day or last week with a couple, some of those same couples noted that they are doing really well in terms of collaborating, they're appreciating each other. It isn't necessarily doing wonders for their sense of intimacy. And again, I'm not just talking about sexual intimacy, for their sense of really feeling like they can be deeply honest. What they're finding is they could get back to ways that they could cooperate or collaborate, but a whole lot of stress in couples that are already dealing with intimacy issues, I haven't noticed is actually suddenly, done wonders for them in the intimacy department. But, crises are much more about stability than they are about intimacy. So,
do you want to, I don't know if you had planned to read this, but since it is called Reigniting the Spark, and I think sex is an important part of relationships, do you want to talk a little bit about sex?
Yeah, and sure. I'm always happy to talk about sex. There's the chapter in the book, which I think often people find is a fairly intriguing title. I had a video with this title, which is there, by the way. You're welcome to look at it, but don't look at the videos. Buy the book, right? Buy the book. It's called Sex, Good Sex, and Sacred Sex. And when I say sex, good sex, what I mean is plain old sex, good sex, and sacred sex. I realized when we were talking about this in sort of preparing for this presentation, I have to distinguish when I say plain old sex, that isn't in, for example, I'm not talking about vanilla compared to, bondage and BDSM and things like that. I'm talking about plain old sex simply meaning the act of sex, whatever you consider sex, with someone else, with yourself, whatever you want to call it. And good sex and sacred sex. So let me tell you how I distinguish one from the other. Even for plain old sex, and I talk about this in the book, even for plain old sex, a lot of people, certainly many people who consult with me, it won't be surprising, coming from a therapist. I have a background working with people. I have training in helping people who were traumatized. And so a lot of people have been sexually traumatized. And either as children or adults or both. And I've heard, and many of you probably have too, just heartrending stories of that. And of course, that makes it very difficult even to what I would call plain old sex, just to enjoy the act of sex with another person in a loving, consensual context can be very difficult if it triggers someone and they are freaking out. So even plain old sex requires that you heal from trauma, that you be comfortable in your own skin, comfortable with your body, have some knowledge. It's amazing to me over the years how many adults, often like educated adults, don't know how things work. I remember a guy years ago I worked with where a doctor was ready to fit him. How graphic do I want to get? Not that graphic. Anyway, the point was a doctor was going to treat him for something because the doctor hadn't asked enough questions to recognize that his problem wasn't that he couldn't maintain his arousal. The problem was that he was prematurely ejaculating, and it was obvious if you just asked him a little bit of detailed question. And the doctor was going to fit him with this, this was before Viagra, and he was going to fit him with this implantable device when he didn't need that at all. It was really amazing. People are not, and this unfortunately is true of a lot of professionals, people are not willing to just talk about it easily. So for plain old sex, you need to be comfortable talking about it. Now, what's my definition of good sex compared to plain old sex? If plain old sex is a way of connecting with somebody physically, good sex is a way of connecting with somebody physically in an intimate way. By intimate, I don't necessarily mean, it's not like that. Sometimes people make the distinction between, I won't use the vulgar Anglo-Saxon word, but the word that I mean that starts with F, and making love. We're trying to keep this this video, PG rated. I'm not talking about that. Intimacy can be you can have all sorts of attitudes, but intimacy is that fundamental sense of honest connection. For good sex, by which I mean intimate sex, you need to be able to take the risk of saying what you like, what you don't like. You need to be able to hear that as well as say it. This tends to be gendered. I'm often saying this to men much more than women. For crying out loud, when she, assuming a heterosexual relationship, when she says, don't do that so hard or do it differently or something, don't be a jerk about it. On the contrary, accept that as this gift. It's an offering. She's giving you the keys, Smile and be grateful and do what she says, It's like you're trying, you'll have a lot more fun that way. But, I'm being facetious there, but really not. There's lots of couples I deal with where, God forbid somebody should say yes or no to, no to something. And, the quintessential sexual issue that will come up in virtually any couple if they're together long enough. You can boil it all down to this. The moment when one person is interested in having or continuing or pursuing sex and the other is saying no. That is a signal moment, because how you handle that moment habitually, and even in any given circumstance, is not only an indicator of how you're doing as a couple in your intimate life, it's actually a cause. It's a causal factor in how you're going to do in the future. If you handle that with grace, if whoever is saying no says no with grace, and whoever gets the no and is disappointed receives it with grace, smile and grace, and just doesn't go into a deep freeze or punish or get angry or any of that stuff, that couple is probably doing pretty well. And when I say deliver it with grace as well as receive it with grace, this is another aspect where if you want to be intimate with someone, sometimes that means saying, no, I don't feel like having sex with you right now. Because and look, the idea of mercy sex is not a terrible thing, but you have to be true to yourself is what I'm trying to say. You have to, the problem comes up when people feel, and I've heard many couples describe this one, again, often gendered in this direction, where the woman will say, it's been a few days and I can see he's starting to get grumpy, and so if I go ahead and have sex with him, I'll buy myself a couple of days of him not being a total jerk. And I have heard that a lot, unfortunately, and that is a serious problem. And so it puts the woman in that situation, in a situation where she has to basically compromise her integrity in order to avoid being punished. And sometimes that can go to the point of abuse. So that's that's an aspect of intimacy where intimacy involves being honest about that. And of course, receiving it with grace, receiving a no with grace is really important too. So that's good sex. Now, and good sex also, by the way, implies those things I was talking about earlier about maybe you want to suggest something and you're not sure how your couple will receive it. That's important too. And finally, sacred sex. Yes, I'll get there. Yes.
Because we have a couple more.
We have a couple more questions. Yeah. Great. So sacred sex, really is much more about sacred than it is about sex. Now, what do I mean by sacred sex? If I said Plain old sex is a way of connecting physically. Good sex is a way of connecting intimately. Sacred sex is a way of connecting intimately where you raise that connection to the domain of the sacred. Now, what do we mean by the sacred? The sacred means connecting with forces way beyond just each of you and even the two of you. You know, I'm not going to be talking a lot about my marriage chapter. You can read it in the book. But basically, marriage by analogy is what happens when, you, at least in my definition of the only really good reason to get married these days is if you want to elevate your relationship to the domain of the sacred, which is to say, and again, even if you're not religious, to connect it to something much bigger than yourselves that you don't even define. Sacred sex is all about that. Now, I point out in the book, why do I say sacred sex as opposed to, you know, sacred dishwashing or sacred ditch digging? There are many people who would say, well, you actually can do sacred dishwashing and sacred ditch digging, but the reason sacred sex comes up a lot, the reason there's such a thing as tantra, I don't know if there's such a thing as the tantra of dishwashing, but there certainly is about sex, is that the forces involved in sex are in the Hebrew word norah, you know, awesome. They are awe-inspiring, and because of that, they are very much conducive to experience of the sacred.
So we have about 4 minutes left, and we've got a couple of.
I will note we're not absolutely restricted to time,
so we're
we're
cool.
We can
go over as long as you want.
with respect to folks, I realize you might be coming and going, but no, we're not. There's no set time here. We're not. It's not like reserving a Zoom meeting or something like that. This is. Okay. We can go up to 8 hours. We will spare you that. Okay, we could actually go up to 8 hours.
Okay, so a fellow psychologist, Paul Foxman, asks.
Hi, Paul.
Hi, Paul. I wonder if in the book you address the tension in couples between connection, us, and separateness, self-identity. Yeah,
great point. I guess the closest I come to that is what I was just talking about in terms of the marriage chapter, where I comment that the notion of marriage is precisely about that sense of transcending. Well, of course, I'm saying that marriage transcends not only the individual, transcends even the sense of us. But I guess implicit in my definition of intimacy is that kind of sense that you're creating something. I do talk about that in various parts of the book, that synergy where you're creating something that's much more than the sum of its parts. And you know, I often comment on this to couples. The experience of intimacy, and really what therapy is a setting designed to promote intimate conversation between the couple and with the therapist. It's designed to be able to say what you need to say compassionately and without panic, but in the presence of a lot of anxiety because you don't know how it's going to go. And that it's intimacy that creates that sense of us. And I often say this to couples, you know, when you have that intimate, one of my expressions is you get to the right argument. When you get to the right argument, you're not squabbling anymore. When you get to the right argument, you're having an intimate conversation. It may be really painful and difficult, but you then think thoughts neither one of you would have thought yourself because you've become something other than just individuals. So that perhaps that addresses what you're talking about.
And we have a question, actually more a comment, I guess a question. Can you give specific tools for anxiety relief during these stressful times?
Yeah. Now, of course, Dr. Paul Foxman, who just asked a really good question, is the world-class expert on that very question. So I invite you to read his books on that subject. So there's a free plug for you, Paul. But yes, I can offer a few possibilities. It is, and none of these will come as any surprise to you. You know, be kind, don't panic, and have faith, right? What is it that will facilitate that sort of faith? There are bottom-up and top-down approaches to calming yourself in the midst of something like this. And the bottom-up approach involves things, at least as I define the terms, involves physical interventions. You know, breathing exercises are magnificent. Meditation, mindfulness meditation, that kind of stuff can be really helpful. People will often tell me, oh, I'm terrible at meditation because my mind keeps wandering. And, you know, I will point out to them, you know, it's like if you're curling weights, you know, wouldn't it be easier to curl weights if you weren't holding anything in your hand? Your mind wandering is the weight that you are curling. That's the exercise. So bringing your mind back without judging yourself is the exercise of mindfulness meditation. So go ahead and do it even if you're lousy at it. You're being lousy at it is the work. That's good. You can't do it wrong that way. So that's good stuff. I'm a fan of what I call, and I didn't make up this term, square breathing. It's really anything that will slow down your respiration rate will tend to feed back to the parts in your brain that determine whether you're in a panic or not. So, if you're in a panic, your respiration rate increases. If you actually decrease your respiration rate when you're really nervous, you will probably find yourself less nervous pretty quickly. So all that sorts of stuff, controlled breathing type stuff, is really helpful. And in terms of anything you can do with your partner that involves something other than freaking out is probably going to be helpful, especially if you're, positively inclined toward each other in the first place. So, things of that sort. Those are the things that come to my mind. Judy, you might have some ideas in that realm as well. What do you think?
Well, let's see.
I know what I just thought of. Mahjong, right? Play Mahjong. Play Mahjong with your friends.
Yes, I've been playing Mahjong with my friends online. We have the same group thing, but while we're playing, we're FaceTiming. Since we can't be in the same room together. So I think it's very important to spend time. I know all the experts keep saying connect with your friends, and it really is vital. So it's been great to connect with friends. And even, this Facebook thing, talking to all of you and seeing you here and having your support has been so great. And all the comments that we've gotten and the emails that we've gotten and phone calls, it's just been wonderful. So that's been a really nice thing to have. Bruce and I have been taking a lot of long walks. We've becoming pretty good at ping pong.
we have, not to a good ping pong player, but for us, we've been having a blast playing ping pong for pretty close to an hour a day. We've been playing ping pong.
And Rabbi Edelson weighed in here saying there are Jewish Kabbalistic breathing techniques to do. Somebody just tuned in, so I can't finish reading it. Breathing techniques such as chedva, breathing where you use the numerical value of the Hebrew letter to count, inhale, hold, exhale. Yeah, that's also used, I know, in yoga. So if you're not a Kabbalah expert, you can also do yoga. If you've got a hobby, I'm hearing from people who are knitting more than they've ever knitted in their lives. I was talking to a friend of mine today. She told me she's reading this great book about the history of Africa. And, she's doing a lot of reading. So it's a nice time to reconnect. And, you hear on the news, families are doing jigsaw puzzles. I've got friends who do those. They're playing board games together. So it's a nice time to just relax. And instead of looking at it as an anxiety time, you can look at it as a positive time, to have that time where you didn't have before with each other. So it really a nice time to connect. And
I want to put in a plug for Zoom services that our synagogue has been having, and even Frum shuls, even Orthodox shuls have been doing gatherings right before Shabbat. They've been having pre-Shabbat gatherings where they do everything up until the Sabbath Psalm in the service, so that they can get together as well. Because being with whatever your communities are, I know there are lots of Zoom church services as well. Being whatever your communities are is really also very important in this time. I have found it so fascinating. When we take our long walks. And the vast majority of people are very, very respectful of the social distance and things. I think they see the gray-haired guy, and that they say, "Oh boy, better avoid him." He's with a young woman, but he should avoid the gray-haired guy. And it's funny. I've commented to Judy. It's like we're all a bunch of friendly lepers, And I hope that term isn't disrespectful in any way. But people smile to indicate, yes, I'm avoiding you, but I want to show you that I'm not being hostile. And it's so interesting that people often want to, go out of their way to do that. People are saying hi to each other. In Vermont, those of you who don't live in Vermont maybe don't know this, but in Vermont, everybody says hi to each other anyway. But there is that sense of real community in this, I think.
Have a comment here that says, write actual letters to grandchildren. So it doesn't just have to be grandchildren, but that's great too. I know we've been Skyping with or FaceTiming, whatever, with our grandchildren. So that's a nice thing to do. But actual letters, now you've got that time, and that's something that they can keep with them. So thank you, Gail. That's a very nice suggestion.
Yeah. So any other Q&A at this point before we close the presentation? I want to reiterate how you can get a hold of the book and urge you to do so. if you go to brucechalmer.com books, brucechalmer.com/books, as it says down at the bottom of the screen, what you'll find there, you're not buying them from me, you're buying them from, Amazon or Barnes & Noble or whoever. You can also order it. If you want to support your local bookstore, you can order it from any bookstore. It's, the distribution channels are set up to do that, so you don't have to order it from the big monsters. As I mentioned earlier, I will put in a plug for at least maybe getting the Kindle version from Amazon, because that really does affect sales down the line. And I almost forgot to mention, those of you who are waiting for the 99-cent special, I apologize. I found out from my publisher like 3 days ago, unfortunately, after we'd scheduled this and we're all set up to go, he said, didn't I tell you it's April 15th? We moved it to April 15th. So there will be a 99-cent special on the Kindle book, and starting on April 15th. So if you want to tell everybody, buy it all on that day, that would be fine. Frankly, if you buy it sooner, that's fine too. It'll cost you $4.99 for the Kindle version, but I would be very much happy to do it. I was saying to Judy when we were preparing for this, I feel like what we should be showing now is an episode of Downton Abbey or a Leonard Cohen concert, or something like that, because it's like this feels like a pledge break. But and look, give tzedakah to your favorite charities while we're at it. But yeah, please do buy my book.
And if you do like the book, give it a 5-star review on Amazon, because we can't be doing book appearances and. You have a book, you want all the help you can get. So if you like it, don't just write a 5-star review if you don't like it. But if you like it, write a good review. And
I will tell you, if you don't like it, don't write a 1 or 2 or 3-star review. Tell me about it, because it is, again, that's the way the game is played these days. Getting 5-star reviews on Amazon seems to be it's how sales get boosted. So thank you. Anything else we need to share at this point?
I think that's it. And Chris says go with Cone. I'm with you, Chris.
That's totally, Judy would be.
That's what I've been doing.
Yes.
Somebody asked about de-stressing. I have been listening to a lot of Leonard Cohen this week. Boy.
Yeah. I get all verklempt. So thank you all for sharing this experience with us, and L'chaim again. Whoops, I got to get that on camera. L'chaim, and l'chaim to everybody, and may you all stay healthy.
Have a good time, and you can continue the conversation on AskDrChalmer.com. No,
it's actually it would be brucechalmer.com/blog, actually.
Oh.
I did a blog post about this. But yeah, or feel free to send us email. Yes, and I'm going to put up this screen now. This is our goodbye screen. So I'm going to send you out with some music. This is music that I wrote and was recorded by Fire and Lightning Consort almost 20 years ago now. And
thank you all so much.
Blessings to you all.